Appamada and its programs are supported by your generosity, and your generosity and support makes such a difference. You can find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org. Thank you.
Intensive practice at Tassajara, it becomes more of a sort of retreat center that opens the doors widely beyond the Zen world. It's wonderful, invites people in for the summer to do workshops and retreats and just kind of get away and sit in the hot springs. But it makes it such that, 3-week practice intensives aren't available, but they're not doing that this year. And so Paul and Gil saw this as an opportunity to try something new, and in doing so, take a fresh look at this way that we've been practicing at Tassajara for now almost like 60 years.
Wow. Yeah. I hadn't realized that.
Yeah. So I think that like a spirit of curiosity and experimentation really animated the intensive from the beginning.
Can you speak a little bit about those two schools, about the Mahayana and the Soto's particular flavor of the Mahayana, and the Theravada and the particular insight meditation center, and embodied in those two teachers? I mean, how are they?
Sure, yeah. Well, what was really interesting, and I think what was really interesting and surprising to Paul even. So on the first night of the intensive, we kind of get together for more or less like welcome. Let's just kind of get together and check in and talk about what we might be up to here. And Paul, who for simplicity's sake, we'll put him kind of on the far spectrum of the formal expression of this teaching. That's kind of more pure Soto Zen, if you want to call it that. Walks into the room wearing just casual clothes, doesn't have one of these on, very laid back. And a couple minutes behind him is Gil, who walks in with Sunway and his brown rakusu. He came in the whole Zen garb. And it was hilarious because, Paul's like, well, I just assumed Gil would be wanting to sort of throw off the yoke of all of this form.
Right.
And it turns out that Gil was most interested in like coming and like really doing Soto Zen practice that he hadn't had a chance to do in a long time. I don't think he had his robes on at Tassajara since the late 80s. So that's one way it's embodied. I mean, they did it backwards, sort of, to begin. But for now, I'll try to relay a little bit of what Gil relayed near the end of the intensive about the way he was thinking about this. Is that right at the heart of the Soto way of doing things, which is what we're doing here for the most part, is a focus on like the manifestation and expression of practice in every moment. Right? Like even Zazen is not, though it's really like the center of gravity and the anchor of the practice, especially in a monastic setting, the entire flow of the day is Zazen. It's not like we're doing Zazen and then it's kind of interrupted by lunch or work practice. We're sitting such that we can just keep on sitting while we're doing everything else, right? And we'll talk maybe a little bit more about I'll just say something now. It's much more formal. There's a lot of, we turn everything into a ceremony all day long. I mean, that's one way to think about what monastic life is like. It's that every facet of your life becomes a ritual, ceremonial expression. And in so being, it's not just you eating lunch, but it's you eating lunch and like expressing the teaching somehow.
And I will say that having been to Tassajara, there are altars everywhere.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
At the bathroom, at the bathhouse, in the kitchen,
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So there is a ceremony for everything you do.
Yeah. And usually we didn't do it this time. We made lots of adjustments. I'll talk about that. That's another way that these two met that's really interesting, what we sort of kept and what we let go of. But during a formal practice period, even eating, like I think a typical meal, oryoki meal, where we eat at our seat, is about 40, 45 minutes long, and 6 minutes of that is like putting food in your mouth, you know, like the least of it is the part where you like consume food. It's receiving food. It's like caring about your utensils. It's about, again, like a ceremonial expression. So anyway, Soto Zen as like really emphasizing expression and manifestation. And then Gil said, you know, that the tradition that he comes from, teaching in this Vipassana school. So Vipassana is a newish school of Buddhism that arose mostly in the West in about the last 50 years. That is the primary kind of Theravada school. And so if I say Vipassana and Theravada for the sake of this talk, it's the same. But Gil said, you know, what we do at Insight is we really emphasize making contact with this kind of awakened mind, or familiarizing yourself with it, or sort of discovering it and nourishing it in oneself. And though they might have a work practice or a work practice period, and of course they'll encourage the participants to be mindful and so on while they're doing that, it doesn't have the same emphasis and valence that it does at Tassajara. And so he was really excited about like leaning into that.
Yeah.
And I'd say about half the people that were there came more from his communities that have never been in a formal Zen setting. So again, I was kind of surprised. I thought it was going to be like Vipassana on Monday and Zen on Tuesday. And Vipassana. Not the case. And so he was able to then really try to focus on bringing forth teachings from the Theravada tradition that explicitly supported kind of the way we're used to talking about things in the Zen world.
So in a more formal, maybe not formal, but what did you see that he was bringing from Vipassana that was similar, or that came together with Zen and made a bridge?
Yeah. What comes to mind, and I think this is because this was something of a thread through the whole intensive that he kept sort of returning to. As a mostly Zen practitioner, it felt to me like he was really trying to work on something of a tension between the way that something's expressed in the Theravada school and the way we usually talk about it in Zen. And what that was is he gave this wonderful talk where he started by saying something like, you know, we talk a lot in Zen about taking refuge in the triple treasure, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. It's the entry gate in a way. And he said, you know, but in the ancient teachings, the Buddha that's never the instruction. That never comes up. It's done occasionally when people are moved to do it, but the Buddha never recommended that people take refuge in the triple treasure. Rather, the teaching was to take refuge in the self, and not take refuge in the self, but make oneself a refuge, to make oneself safe for beings, right? And so there's a couple tensions there. Number one is like the emphasis that we generally put in the Mahayana tradition, that this is for the benefit of beings, this is for the benefit of others, this is about sort of staying until we've all gotten whatever we're after, I guess.
Right.
So that's kind of tension number one. And tension number two is that it's very much about like making oneself a refuge. Like there's an air of like a project, like we're trying to build something here, right? And again, in Zen, we usually de-emphasize that. This is really just a matter of emphasis and de-emphasis.
Interesting.
The emphasis in Zen would be, no, we're manifesting what's already the case. We're bringing forward and making explicit what's already here, as opposed to the Theravada, which is going to lean into it more in terms of like, no, you need to like do something. You need to make this happen. You need to train the mind to become a refuge.
So it sounds like there's more instruction in actual things to do, like the Soto has more instruction about the forms, and here's how the ceremony goes, and here's when you bow. And the Vipassana, or the insight, has more, okay, here's how you're going to build this refuge. Here's how you're going to recognize and then refine or strengthen.
Yeah, I can put like Theravada teachings like in bullet points in a way that I can never take a good Dharma talk at his own temple. You know?
That's a really great way to describe it.
You know, there's the 7 factors awakening and the 5 hindrances, and that like the teachings are very clear, they're very systematic, and they at least seem to be kind of really directed at something like self-cultivation, which through years, you know, thousands of years of different Zen schools forming and all the kind of doctrinal, you know, fights between schools and stuff over the years, we came up with some idea that there's like the Mahayana, which is the great vehicle that's really about like liberating all beings, and then there's the old school Hinayana, which is about like self-improvement, and they're kind of like, you know. So we really tried to like open that up and let it go. And so, yeah, and then he would always connect any Theravada teaching he brought up with usually with Dogen. And this wonderful teaching of Dogen saying, like, do not practice the Buddha Dharma for yourself. Do not practice the Buddha Dharma to benefit others. Practice the Buddha Dharma to practice the Buddha Dharma and give rise to this wisdom and compassion that is sort of the inevitable byproduct of that. And so in terms of the kind of, you know, conceptual teachings that were going on throughout, to me, that was something we were turning a lot. Paul actually introduced, I think, a poem that a lot of people will be familiar with, David White. It's called The House of Belonging.
Yes.
And so in Paul's talks, he was really, talking about the house of belonging. And then there, David White says the same thing. Like, I have to like come, what is the word he uses? Something about like meeting his like adult aloneness is the word he uses.
Wow.
Right? The aloneness. And then that aloneness, like that becomes the temple to which everyone is invited, you know.
Wow.
But it really does begin like the Dharma is this body, you know, and I think there can be a way in certain Mahayana conversations and traditions where we lose sight of the fact that like your practice is just yours, you know, and you need to take care of that.
Wow, yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I'll listen to this talk again, and more Dharma talks will come out of this talk. It's great, yeah. What Dogen, you know, that idea of Dogen saying, don't do it for yourself, don't do it for other people, but you're doing it to grow into something that is a seed.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Even the teaching that comes up here with some regularity from the Lotus Sutra, famously of only a Buddha together with a Buddha can realize Buddhas, which, and I think rightly so, is usually translated like this, the relational dimension of practice, that we can't forget this relational depth that's right at the heart of all this. But Paul noted that the word only can also be translated alone.
Wow.
Alone Buddha, together with Buddhas, does this practice, right?
Wow.
So again, even right there in the Lotus Sutra, like this feeling that somehow, maybe the suggestion is that in some of the Mahayana discourse now, like we're losing a little bit of touch with like the part that is that just you know.
Interesting, yeah.
So what's the difference between a lone Buddha and Buddhas and only a Buddha and a Buddha?
A relational Buddha, yeah. And thinking about the life as being a process that happens between everything, and the idea of cultivating a single thing. that, those two things, I can really see that would give a different emphasis.
Mm-hmm. And here, I feel like the way it comes up for me in this space is from sort of some of the psychological teachings that we work here. This idea that like you can't let go of a self until you have one. You know, like the quickness with which in some spiritual communities we want to sort of jump past the part where I have to like really be myself, you know, and take responsibility for myself. And so I think I'll leave that there. I mean, that those were very much the waters we were swimming in. For this intensive.
So tell us about an average day. I mean, you were there for 3 weeks, and it might be nice to know, what was it like? How early did you get up?
So it was fun. It was roughly based on the usual practice period schedule. But I don't know, I don't want to say like loosened up isn't quite the word. A few changes were made, right? A few changes were made for several reasons. I think one, to make it more accessible, because it's really a rare event that a pretty large number of people without a lot of formal training get to go to Tassajara and like get into a practice intensive. Generally, you need to have some time. You need to have done practice periods at other places, and this is all good. You want to know it's a demanding experience, and so this time to really open the doors more widely. Not that there wasn't discernment in who came, but it's like, how do we make this accessible? You know, how do we bring people in? What's the right amount of? It's what attracted me to Appamada early on too. Was talking to Flint and Peg and realizing like, oh, what we're doing here is this constant sort of meditation on what are we keeping from this like wonderful tradition that we are representing and trying to move forward here, and what are we letting go, and why, and what is the formal side, and what does it have to do with it? You know, this kind of constant negotiation around the more kind of formal aspects of practice. And so this was delightful because the whole 3 weeks was like, in a way, like just that.
I know we struggled at Appamada. Maybe struggled is not the right word, but negotiated and considered this idea of inclusivity. You know, how do you make people feel comfortable in a setting where it can be very intimidating?
And we made a couple easy adjustments. Rather than admonitions that we usually read, we read like guidelines, you know. Rather than the primary teaching in a monastery generally is follow the schedule completely. All you actually need to know, if you ever want to do such a practice at a monastery, really is to just follow the schedule completely and show up completely. And this time, I think it was more difficult because again, they changed the wording a little bit to like follow the schedule in a way that's wise for you.
That's really different.
Which seems like a loosening or making it more easy, but like I don't know that that's the case. It's a lot easier for me when I'm just like, all right, that's it. I'm gonna be here where it says to be here.
Exactly.
Done. But the moment I have to start sort of like discerning whether I want to go to the 50th period of Zazen today or not. It gets tricky. So we would wake up at the wake up bell, I think, was at 5 a.m., which is wonderful. The monastery, like there's really someone with a bell who runs through the monastery and wakes everybody up. We'd sit a couple periods, probably a couple 40-minute periods in the morning, have service, which is a shortened version of the service that we generally do at Tassajara. And then we had all of our meals in the dining room. That was a big difference. Rather than oryoki, which is this formal way of eating where you stay at your seat. And again, I don't know, but it wasn't more or less, I mean, it's everything that you kind of let go of brings another set of challenges along with it. This
Right.
time we ate in the dining room, and that was a whole thing to explore,
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
in its own way fascinating. Like,
Yeah.
it's much easier to kind of keep this continuity when all I have to do to eat is like spin around from the wall the other direction and like receive food, to like the way that you can kind of like pop the bubble between the Zendo and
Right.
the dining hall. So we would eat, and then we would work for 3 hours. We moved the work period to 3 hours in the morning. I think everybody knows this, but like I mentioned at the beginning, work practice and Zazen are like same thing, same level of emphasis and importance.
Mm.
I work in the shop. That's where I've always worked when I'm there. So I do like handyman stuff and chop wood and fix things that need to be fixed. And then there'd be either a Dharma talk or more Zazen, lunch, and then a time in the afternoon that we called the Dharma activity. And I think that was just to kind of give us some leeway.
Yeah.
So sometimes that was a talk, sometimes that was a more sort of interactive engagement. It reminded me a lot of what we do here quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And other times like it would just be Paul leading like a yoga class to help us loosen up
Nice.
a little bit. Yeah.
Nice, yeah.
And then, yeah, we had like maybe an hour and a half hour for bath time, shower time,
Nice.
and then back to the Zendo for service, dinner, zazen, bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
And we do 4-day weeks. And then the morning of the 5th day after zazen and silent breakfast would be our personal day, where there's no schedule until evening zazen again.
So you got some time to actually experience the place.
Yes.
As opposed to the intensive.
Yeah, trails, and you can go for hikes, you can swim in the cold creek, you can sit in the hot springs. Something I didn't do, which was interesting and for me significant, was like not study Buddha Dharma. I really had a feeling this time that like my head was very full of a lot of old Buddhist furniture that was not necessarily helpful.
Huh.
And so I just really, it was a very like sensuous, practice intensive.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more about that. Actually, let me check. How much time do we have?
14 minutes.
No way.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll save that for another Dharma talk, and I want to open it up for questions, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, I'd love this to be a conversation.
Yeah. Anne has a
I
question.
do. I actually have 3 questions.
Bring it.
I'm just gonna ask them all at once, because they're not that long, of an answer probably. I was wondering whether Sangha Week's going on at the same time. How many people were in your group? And then also, was participating in this practice session influential on where your direction is heading right now on your path?
Okay, number 1, Sangha Week is a wonderful thing that Sanghas do, most of which are affiliated with San Francisco Zen Center, where you take a group of people from your Sangha and your teacher, and you all together go out to Tassajara and spend a week together. And it'd be like a bunch of Appamada folks going, instead of this Zendo, we have the lovely valley of Tassajara. They did do those all summer, but they shut it down for us.
Okay.
So those 3 weeks were closed. I believe there were like 50 people there. About, I don't know, 10 to 20 that were, probably about 20 that were residents of Tassajara, who I was really happy. I didn't know, I thought they might end up kind of working in the background or something, and they were part of the intensive too. Right. So it was those of us who came in plus the Tassajara residents. And the experience of that intensive, is it like influencing my practice now? Yes, for sure. I think most importantly in ways that I don't know about, but yet. But I think in a really obvious way, the experience of like holding the forms like we did, like in this experimental kind of way, was really rich and something that I think I'm still thinking about a lot. And there was some real healing for me, honestly, between me and the Theravadan teachings, which to me are just vastly different than really what we're doing at a Zen center. They're thousands of years older. They're coming from a different culture. They have different sort of direction and methods. And I think over the years, I've been at a lot of places where I felt that those teachings were employed kind of unskillfully in a way that kind of distorted the good that they had to offer and what was going on in the Zen context that they were offered in. And most of it was probably me. I'm kind of a curmudgeonly person sometimes. Passionate. But being with these two teachers who are just, so Paul too, he trained in Theravada, he trained in Thailand for a long time before. So both of them have really deeply trained in both sort of sides. And to see the way in which they were very clear about the differences and the importance of preserving and not just kind of willy-nilly conflating, like I read a Dogen text and Dogen is just very difficult to understand. It may or may not be appropriate to draw a clear teaching from Theravada to illuminate that,
Right.
And to see the way that they negotiated that was really instructive. And I think it's softened my heart again around a lot of these earlier teachings. So I hope to continue this experiment of seeing how they fit and don't fit together.
I'm gonna do one more question from the folks online, and then I think that's all the time we're gonna have.
Whoa.
We have a little time, I know.
Okay.
So is anybody online like to raise their hand? Yeah, Monica.
So John and Ann, thank you so much. And John, you are such a wonderful speaker. I mean, I was going, how in the world to compare the two? But you gave a really good taste of the retreat, I think. I mean, from what you can get here. I have just a sort of silly question. Did Gil wear the robes again, or did he wear them all the time? Or
oh yeah, he was in full robes the whole time, and he was serving his doshi the whole time.
Oh my God!
Which was delightful because he didn't know what he was doing, in just like the most wonderful way,
So during COVID, I did about 6 or 7 retreats with Gil online, and really. And what I'm wondering, what I really felt when you said like your heart opened up, the sentence about, follow the schedule wisely for yourself. To me, that just opened my heart with like just this other layer of compassion that I really loved sinking into and following the schedule. But I mean, was that one difference that you felt, or during your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. But like, I don't know that I thought about it like particularly in connection with that expression. I think I could give as many examples that of Gil and Paul talking about how like just really doing it is an expression of compassion as well, or can be. So, I mean, I think the care in which we were just in this constant sort of negotiation with this experience certainly brought that forth,
So glad you got
something Paul kept returning to, and I think this is true, is like we'd be standing out. I remember I was sitting by the coffee tea area with him or something, and he just said, "God, I wonder if this is what it was like for Suzuki Roshi, Like he brought all these like hippies out here and he has all these Zen forms, and like we're trying to do them, but he knows that we're bungling around, and like, is this what it was like, to discover this? And like, what is it to discover it? But also like not be just making it up, I think is the question, Like what is the way to like really uphold the forms as this expression, right? But like without making them too seriously, Paul would say, you know, we make mistakes, but we didn't do anything wrong, you know? And so one moment comes up that was really lovely. I was Gil's Gico, and so during service, my job, we were offering flower petals instead of incense at this service, was to, you know, come in with Gil and be at the altar to offer flower petals, and then go kind of stand in the back while we're chanting and bowing. So we do the first offering. I haven't done this, and I was rusty too. It's been a while since I've done full kind of service at Tassajara. And there's this moment where a bell rings in the middle of the Heart Sutra, and the Doshi steps back and goes to make a second offering at the altar. And Gil moved, and I was moved, and I went with him. And as soon as I was approaching the altar, I knew for sure that it was wrong. You know, I knew for sure. And so I offered flower petals, and he offered them to the Buddha, and we bowed deeply, and we continued with service. And afterwards, we always have a little sort of like huddle, the priest and Tanto and Chico afterwards. And we bowed and just grinned at each other. And I said, I think we made an extra offering, you know? And he said, wasn't that lovely, you know? And I said, yeah, when in doubt, make offerings to the Buddha. And I hope that's something that stays with me. So I hope that kind of captures like the spirit of things. It was really wonderful to like, for Gil to be trying to bring it completely to service.
Right.
And then he would just like bow and be like, oh, we're supposed to do this, you know, and then he'd get up and be like, all right, back it up, let's do this chant, and then let's bow. And we would grin, and then, but when it was time to come back, it was like, okay, now let's like really do it again, you know, how to toggle between.
Yeah, we're not still laughing, we're doing it.
Yeah, like how can you really like bring it, but not have to do that by being uptight, or by kind of lapsing into a feeling of like, well, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, you know?
Yeah,
like, what if it does? Totally, you know?
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, and like I said, I'll re-listen to this, and there'll be more Dharma talks that spring from it, I'm sure.
Wonderful. Yeah, it felt like this went too quickly, and I love to talk about this stuff. So if anybody wants to continue offline, please don't hesitate to find me. I live out back. You can knock if you're in town.
Yeah. All right. I think we will go ahead and move on to the next part of our offering.